start the afternoon session, though, I know many of you probably have your phones, you probably have a calendar on your phone. Let me invite you to mark on your calendar at some point this afternoon what a momentous day it really is. Today is October the 3rd. Y'all probably don't realize how significant the day is, but when I finish this next introduction, you're going to understand why. It is my pleasure. I've been waiting most of my career for the opportunity to be able to introduce Jeff Morgan to this group. And not yet, you're not ready yet, so just be patient over there. So there's some facts you need to know. I know that Jeff is a name that many of you know. Many of you have known and have a relationship with this business, J.L. Morgan & Associates. They do a fantastic job in the HCAHPS and patient experience and callbacks, et cetera, and he'll talk a little bit about that. So I have nothing but great admiration for the company and the people who are in that company, with the exception of the president. And I am supposed to be professional and dignified here today, but I just cannot bring myself to do that. When he comes to the stage in a few minutes, you'll notice that his pants are fairly long. He is purposely covering up the fact that he is wearing socks for the first time that I have ever seen it in my life. He has on a tie, which may be a first also. But the problem is both of them still have the tags on it so they can return them at the end of the day. He's that cheap. But again, I feel like I know Jeff quite well. I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of nights with his wife. I'm sorry, in a separate hotel rooms, I'm sorry. That was the part I'd forgotten, Jeff. So many of you may know Kim, who worked for the association many years, and we used to travel and do some things on the quality front. So again, have a lot of admiration and respect for Kim, not her husband. So this is beginning to feel like a little bit of a roast, so I guess I should stop. But let me just say, it always makes me proud to look around and see somebody in our industry who takes an idea, moves that idea, and turns out with the ability to help a lot of our hospitals do better things for the communities we serve. And Jeff has done that over the years. He's been a longtime supporter of the Hospital Association, fantastic individual. You can't be around him and not enjoy his company. He's really a fantastic person. If we could get him past these other elements that I just described earlier, then he might be successful one day. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Morgan of J.L. Morgan & Associates, and look forward to the information he has to share with us. I think we'll all have a lot to learn. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Keith. I mean, the gloves are off. I told you. You blew it. The gloves are off. I mean, all the pictures that I didn't put in here of him are going to be, just email me. I'll send you all the pictures of him. So I appreciate you guys letting me come up and chat for a few minutes. So I want to make it really, really informal. Granger said I had 10 minutes, whatever. So we'll make it really informal. I want to sort of do it like an open kind of forum kind of thing. So we'll chat a little bit about some things we're doing, some things we've seen, and maybe share that. You'll notice we didn't put a ton of pages in this thing. One is it's after lunch, and two is you don't want to see a bunch of numbers and stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about what we've seen across the board, share a little bit of that, give you a couple of examples, talk about a few things on the HCAHPS side that are going to be new coming up in the next few months or so, and really just have an open kind of forum, if that's okay with y'all. And very informal. I know there's like 10 minutes or whatever at the end for questions, but hey, just if we have questions, by all means, just let us know now, or let me know now, and we'll try to. I'll try to take a stab at answering them. You'll notice as we go through this little presentation, you'll notice that there's some common themes that we go through. Oh yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay. I might have gone backwards. Okay. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Say, Granger, what did you do, man? What have you done to my thing? Oh, good gosh. All right. One is not to be able to run this thing. Okay. All right, here we go. A couple of things you'll notice as we go through. There's a common sort of thread that's important that we see as an organization. And a couple of things we'll talk about, and the things I'll mention to you is not just looking at one hospital, but we got the unique, I guess, privilege to look across hundreds of hospitals as if it's one hospital. And so we can run queries across multiple hospitals and try to drill down and look for some commonality where there's such things as low-hanging fruit. And I'll just be very straight and honest. There's no silver bullet. There's no silver bullet. People call us all the time, you know, hospitals we don't work with, they want to know, hey, how do you fix it? And there is no silver bullet. There's no way you can go buy a piece of equipment and invest and come back and it's going to work. It's not going to happen. So don't waste your time. But there is one common theme across all of it that we feel like is the key to making it successful, and that's information. And information is, you know, ultimately important, but it's important only in certain aspects. And the way, I've been doing this for 20-something years, so when I look at it, you know, I look at sort of acronyms and try to figure out ways to make things make sense. And look at a rah-rah approach. You know, for me, you know, I personally think information primarily has to be real time. It has to be real time. Because if it's not real time, it's more retroactive and it's not going to matter. You know, and it has to be accurate. You have to have some accuracy in the data. It's got to be real time, it's got to be accurate, it's got to be reliable. So you got to have those three concepts. And then most importantly, at the end, it's got to be actionable. So you got to have those four concepts and piecing data together. You can't just throw it up on the wall and hope it works. It's too expensive. So we'll go through a couple of things like this. Some things we already know that are no-brainers. And we're pulling this off of, and the example I have in here, we looked over, I don't know, 100 or so thousand surveys, probably more than that. And so the information I want to try to mention to you is statistically sound. It's not something that it's just a maybe or could be. So it's really statistically sound, and it's really common across most hospitals. And if you go back to your HCAHPS site and take a look, you'll probably see some similarities in what I'll tell you. Things we already know, though. We know organizational leadership with a patient-centered culture is critical. I mean, that's a no-brainer. It's absolutely a no-brainer. We know that for a fact. We know that staff engagement, training, follow-up, support for improvement is equally as important. And all of that has to come from a information-based approach. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know what you're doing as far as the patients are concerned. All staff physicians must engage in the concept of positive patient experience. No-brainer. You notice there's no numbers on there that says 10%, 5%, 12%. It doesn't matter. These three pieces of information are critically important. They have to be followed. I promise. So, you know, how do we use the patient feedback to improve? You know, these are again critical pieces of data too. It's imperative the hospitals have a good plan. You know, we'll see sometimes within hospitals and nobody in the state, out of the state, they'll, you know, we'll provide some information, but they don't have a plan. We don't have a plan as to how to follow up and how to use it. You know, we'll have information to hospitals and they'll go, what are we going to do with all this data? You know, we can tell them some things that are going on, what are we going to do about it? Well, I mean, fix it, you know. I can tell you exactly what's going on, but you got to have a plan, an actionable plan, internal to make it work. You know, we see sometimes that, you know, internal, and I know that, you know, I've been in the hospital business too, so I know time is of the essence and nobody has time anymore. So, but we have to have a plan of action to be able to work through what we're already providing. And you got to have it. Again, it's all information purposes. You know, we see timeliness as important. You know, information's got to be acted upon in a timely manner. And probably the last slide we talk about is a piece of data or a piece of supplemental question that CMS has approved that we're going to add to our particular surveys, our HCAHPS survey, to be able to feed back some information based off of this. All right, everybody probably knows this. We just want to put these up here to sort of give the concept of what, you know, the HCAHPS composite measures are, all being back to value-based purchasing. We found out over time, and quite frankly, we just found out luckily, that within the readmission assessment side of it is ultimately important within the HCAHPS component because you gather data in a proactive, real-time approach. And you're going to know what these patients are saying quickly, efficiently. Not that we do it, but anybody can do it. Even internally, it needs to be done. You really have to follow up with these patients. Well, I'll show you in just a second across some of our hospitals how We found that within our data, across 100,000 or so surveys, how particular aspects of the survey, the HCAHPS survey, is directly correlated with the overall rating and recommendation of the hospital. And it'll be almost like it makes no sense. Because when I first did it, when we first looked at it in a correlation aspect and a statistically sound aspect, I thought there's no way that can be. But it really is the case. And we'll get to it in just a second, but just keep in mind, parts of the survey are directly correlated to the overall recommendation and the overall rating of the hospital on the 9-10 level. A couple, three things we'll talk about as far as aspects of the survey are concerned that we've seen that we hear from patients that are problematic. And these are we think these are the three major areas. Of course, all of them are major, but these are the three major areas. We hear from patients, and we, of course, as an HCAHPS vendor, we're required to do all kinds of crazy stuff for CMS. But we're required to actively monitor 10%, and all vendors are doing it, actively monitor 10% of all calls in a live fashion. So, and we obviously take notes on things that are important to patients. We may not be able to show all this to hospitals, but in a real-time aspect for as that particular survey is concerned, but we want to be able to show it overall in a statistically sound method. But these three particulars are extremely important to the patients: discharge teaching, communication about medicines, and obviously transition of care. Three very important pieces. Nursing obviously is important, physicians important, all of those kind of things are important, but these three carry some pretty heavy-duty factors. As far as ineffective teaching goes, and it's probably a bad word, ineffective teaching, it's the perception of the ineffective teaching. It doesn't matter if it's ineffective or not. It matters what the patient thinks. It matters what the patient perceives. It's all subjective. So it really doesn't matter what I think, it matters what they think. And we see in the teaching aspect of it, we see several things. We'll see, important aspects as family members, caregivers' involvement is very important. Sometimes you can drive that, sometimes you can't. Most of the time, this is from a level of discharge from the particular hospital at that time. We see things like, patients, they have, they can't read the discharge instructions. They can't read them. The writing's very small. It's very complex sometimes, especially the elderly patients. We see that a lot. So you think, well, what do? Do you blow it up and put it in a picture? I don't know. Yeah, maybe. But a lot of times we'll see it's ineffective communication in writing. It's ineffective communication actually in the conversation of the patient too. And it's not just something that we make up. We hear this a lot from patients. And a lot of times, I feel like our hospitals are actually doing all these things, but the perception from the patient is it's not happening. And if the perception's there from the patient, then it's reality. This is an extremely important piece. This is one that's correlated, highly correlated. And I'll show you the example in just a second. But we talk about communications and medicines. One of the things we find is that patients obviously don't understand their medications. Not that they can't go get them, not that they don't have the pharmacy. That's important too. Some can't. We'll see 8-10% of patients have no access to be able to get to the pharmacy, and certainly no ability to purchase the meds either. But we see more issues with just the communication with the patients purely not understanding what the medications are, and more importantly, what the side effects of the medications are. I'm going to get ahead of myself here, but I'll go ahead and tell you, since I mentioned the side effects of the medication, it's highly correlated to the HCAHPS survey overall aspect of 9 and 10 in the recommendation. Very highly correlated. I mean, the statistical relevance is very low, so it's highly correlated. I'll wait, and I'll tell you more about that in a second. It's the patients hear, and as we listen to these surveys, the patients hear what the medications are for, what they do. Maybe for dehydration, it may be for whatever, but they don't hear the information relative to side effects. That's going to be extremely important. Care transition. I mean, everybody in the country is suffering with care transition. I mean, the care transition, domain is about 52%, the national average. There is no silver bullet in this either. It's a very complex question. There's 3 questions that make it up. It's a very complex question, or a very complex domain with 3 questions. We see a lot of times, again, back to the information piece of this, the gathering of the information piece, the large piece of one of these questions all deals with staff took my preferences into consideration. That's a big piece of that domain. And again, took my preferences means the information piece of it had to flow better. Their preferences, in their opinion, weren't considered. So even though in our minds in the hospital, their preferences are all we're considering. But again, it's just a matter of education, communication with the patient. Very importantly, again, we find out that in our discharge aspect of reaching patients, pretty quickly going through discharge information, that we find out that, family members and caregivers are ultimately important, extremely important. They all are. So if possible, a no-brainer again, if possible, caregivers aspects involved in the patient's discharge are extremely important, very important. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to come to this one. I'll come back. I tell you, hospitals ask us a good bit. They say, hey, we don't have any money. Where's the low-hanging fruit? We can't invest any more than we've already invested, and I can appreciate that. But what do we do? What do we go after? So this is where we went back, and this is just one example, and it's really twofold. So this is just one example where we looked over. I put 100,000 surveys here, and it's really a lot more than that. It's probably closer to 200,000 surveys. The statistical relevance is very, very low. So, I mean, it's highly statistically correlated. Importantly, what we'll find here is there's 2 major factors that we cued in on that are highly relevant to the 910 and the 4 recommendation of the hospital. And that's medication side effects, and of all things, the call bell. So, and both are relevant in this particular example because both are very similar. You think, well, call bell can't be relevant. I promise you it is. If the patient perceives they didn't get answered, they didn't get the information, they didn't receive the call bell analysis quick enough in their perception, in their mind, I promise you it's going to affect you. I promise you, and it affects it heavily. The other thing we find out, and I'll mention here, is the side effects of medications. We find out that side effects of medications, in listening to these surveys, we find that patients don't understand the words side effects of medication. Side effects is the key analysis. There's no doubt that our nurses are telling the patients what the medicines are and what you got to be careful with and what could happen. No doubt. But when we as a vendor, when any vendor has to talk to the patient, the CMS process is very rigid. There's not a lot of wiggle room in trying to go into a lot of detail. When they audit us annually. You just seem to have a stick knife to have to fool with them. But they're in office about 3 or 4 days, and they go over hundreds of surveys, and they listen to hundreds of calls, and you have to give the survey verbatim, word for word for word. You can't leave out anything. You got to be careful with even how you probe the patient. You got to be very careful because one of the aspects is you can't ever put words in the patient's mouth. So we have to be very, very careful with those kind of things. But, in saying that, we find that the word side effects is very, very important. No doubt we're telling them what the side effects are, but we may just be discussing it with them. But when we call, or when any vendor calls, they have to ask specifically, did you understand the side effects of your medication? The side effects. Now, we find out, and what we did was we drilled this down into these couple examples here, and we wanted to get it into smaller buckets and sort of see what our target population was. And interestingly, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but for those patients who provided what we call the non-top box kind of responses, as far as medication, understanding the side effects of your medication, and I did the call bell analysis as well, just to give you an example, but 82 and 86% respectively were female. That's okay, I'm married to one, so I understand what all that's about. But, but we know without doubt that the target population, when that person comes and is admitted to the hospital, if it's a she, that's our target population. Because that's the person who's going to hurt you on the HCAHPS survey if they don't understand side effects and if they don't understand the analysis and the complications by answering the call bell. No equipment. You don't have to buy any equipment. It's all about communication. It's all about information. We drilled it down a little further, and we found out that 77% and 83% of the ladies were 52 and older. They gave this. So when my mother is in the hospital and we admit her and we do her history and whatever at the bedside, I guarantee you that's your target population. So what did we do? We know that it's the ladies. We know it's 52 and older that are our target population, both in call bell and how the perception of the call bell is answered, as well as understanding the side effects of medications. So we have a couple hospitals. We did this in California. We're actually doing it in California now with some hospitals out there. One is because they have a lot of room for improvement, a lot of room for improvement. So it was not as hard a project to get off the ground. Didn't require buying equipment, monitors, nothing. It required things that are very difficult now, and that's time. But we put a few things in play, and we try to do this as a sort of evidence-based data is what we want to do, evidence-based, that we know this is a fact. So if we can act on this as a factual piece of data, then we've got a better chance of trying to address it. It's repetitive communication. It's just that simple. There's no low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's the low-hanging fruit, there's no silver bullet. But these, if you just are repetitive in doing these particular things, if you're, upon admission, we stress the side effects of the medication. Very simple. It sounds very simple. I know it's complicated because you've got 9 million things you're doing. Been there, done that, done bedside, I've done all that now. So I understand. You just don't have time. But to ever get any better, our opinion is it's repetitive communication with the patient using the words side effects of medication, side effects. Because when we call them and we talk to them, we're going to talk to them about the side effects. That's what we're going to ask them about. Not about, hey, did you understand what your medicines are for and how's it going? Side effects. We talked about doing it on shift change, and this is all hospital specific, however it works best for the hospital. And the main thing is repetitive nature. We talked about shift change. We talked about, monitoring it and reporting off, and those kind of things that, we report. Did the patient understand the side effects of the medication? Yes. Next nurse comes on, do you understand the side effects of your medication? Did we explain that to you well? Same thing with call bell analysis. Nowadays, the patient thinks, that press the call bell and you're going to jump out like a genie. There you are. Well, it doesn't work that way. So it's more of a communication aspect again. How the call bell's initiated, where it goes, how we get to you. We're going to be right. If it's an emergency, we're going to be down there. But if you can give us just a couple minutes, I got 10 patients, 12 patients, 50, whatever. It may take a few minutes, but I just want you to know that. Is that okay? It makes a big, big difference. Just the patient's complete understanding of what's going on. I promise it does. We even suggested this. I think these hospitals are putting together some signage. It's okay. CMS says it's okay to put signage up. You just can't put words in their mouth. You can't say, please give us a 4 for, whatever. Can't do that. But it's okay to put up stuff about, side effects of medications in the room. Did we tell you about your side effects of medications? Ask us about your side effects of medications. It's very important. I promise you, it'll make a big, big difference. These are very preliminary numbers that we're looking at here, and I don't have a number of surveys. No, I didn't put a number of surveys up here that we're looking at, but this will be sort of fluid. It's sort of going on as time goes on a little bit. But just addressing these few small, time-consuming items, we've seen some change, in these scores already. Now, again, I think that all of these were in California, so again, they had some room for improvement. But you can see a little less than 10% improvement in understanding the side effects. When you say side effects, and we ask them about side effects, 10% of the patients are suddenly going to remember side effects. And they'll initiate, yes, definitely. a little less than 4 and a little less than 6% correlated back to the rating and the recommendation of the hospital. I mean, makes no sense. Call bell analysis is very, very similar. But I can tell you without question, if you focus on the ladies who are 52 and older with those two particulars, I'll be flabbergasted if you don't see a positive movement and change in your HCAHPS scores. So nothing you can go by, nothing you can do. Communication is the key. Effective communication is the key. I'll go back now. I just wanted to give you just a little cross-domain analysis of that. So if you have any questions about how we did this or what it is, by all means. But I told Keith we'd add just a couple of slides here and talk about a few things that are changing that you probably already know. And one thing that we've posed CMS and gotten approval for to do that we think will help, in the analysis of data. But the pain questions are changing, this next time around. So pain questions are changing, and they're moving away from sort of the pain management of the patient, the perception of the patient's, how they thought the pain was managed, to, again, important aspect the CMS put out, communication with the patient. It's all about information again. So now these 3 questions are going to sort of replace the 3 that are on there now. They'll fall off the value-based purchasing aspect of it, but they'll still be reported. This starts, next quarter. So for those patients discharged effective the first and the next time around. So you'll notice that we go from talking about the pain management of the patient to the communication about their pain and how it's managed. So again, it's all about information again. I'll flip back over here, just a couple of. So we'll talk about, things we see a way to improve. Not to mention those couple of little things about the call bell and the side effects of medications. But in listening to these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of surveys in a live form, and then even going back and listen to them recording, because we record everything, we listen for keys that are sort of consistent across the board. We don't have any information yet to validate statistically what this will do. But we hear consistently that patients don't, in their mind, perceptively understand or to their understanding that they receive any information that they ask for. And I will tell you, it can be anything. I mean, it can be absolutely anything. But we feel like it's ultimately important, the communication back with the patient in a real-time aspect, that we're able to follow up as a hospital with those patients to satisfy whatever that particular information need was. Now, what we want to do as a company for our hospitals is we want to be able to gauge that statistically and understand, is it relevant and to what degree is it relevant? And so we post CMS as a supplemental question. We're just going to add, when you're discharged home, you receive all the information you personally requested from the hospital. It's a yes-no component. So, excuse me. So it's a yes-no component. So what we want to be able to do then is to be able to take the no components, correlate it back to the overall rating of the hospital and to the recommendation side of the hospital. So this is a piece of data that we're going to add now and be able to correlate it back. But we find a lot, and I'm sure you guys can look at it too, that patients in the rating side of the hospital will rate the hospital either 8, 9, or 10. 9 and 10 are obviously what everybody's shooting for. That's what you want. It's unbelievable how many patients rate the hospital an 8. So it's not that patients are dissatisfied with the hospital at all. And we find that across the board. They're not dissatisfied with the hospital. Most patients love their hospital, but they're not dissatisfied. But the catch is, how do you move those that are satisfied to a greater level of satisfaction? And I personally think it's within these 2 particular items, because we've proved it. I promise you it's the case. So anyway, those are just a few things, that we find that are important within our particular systems, in our hospitals. And no 1 or 2 hospitals are the same, but everybody shares some similarities, and they're going to share the similarities in the Female patients older than 52 admitted that are directly correlated to the side effects of medications, as well as the call bell analysis. So I'll leave you with just saying that if you focus on those two things, repetitive nature, doing something that you don't have time to do, and that's spending labor time in the room with the patient. But if you spend a few extra minutes, you find a way to do that, I promise you, in our opinion, it'll make a big difference. So, you know, I'll close with that, but, you know, I know my time's about, Granger, I used my 10 minutes, I'm sorry. So, did I ask any questions or anything? I don't, you know, if you have questions, I'll be glad to try to answer anything that we're doing from a standpoint. But, you know, if you guys focus on those particular things, I think you'll see a big difference. So.
Part of the question is better.
Yeah, and I'll make it up. Well, I'll refer to him. What about the pictures?
I'm worried.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you should be.
Last picture I got from you was your wife in my driveway.
That's true, it was. But you had that funky little car out there, though. You know, thank y'all very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. In spite of all my fun and humor with Jeff, I do want y'all to know that he does an outstanding job. You can tell from the work that they've done. I'm trying to be serious here for a minute. So if you have needs in this area, I certainly would encourage you to reach out to Jeff. If it's nothing more than just gaining insight to what their experience is, I'm sure he'd be happy to help. So thank y'all very much.